Imagine a global competition, but not one with armies or athletes. This one's fought with algorithms and microchips.
A battle for technological supremacy, you could say, and the ultimate prize.
Dominance in artificial intelligence. And the US and China are the main contenders, locked in this high-stakes race.
Uh,
And one of the big weapons the US is using, sanctions, specifically targeting Chinese tech.
and this isn't just some abstract tech rivalry playing out in Silicon Valley labs. This has huge implications for all of us, right?
Absolutely. AI is rapidly becoming the foundation of everything. Economic power, national security, even the future of, well, just about everything.
Exactly. So getting a handle on this US-China tech war, understanding the strategies at play, well, it's crucial for anyone trying to make sense of the world today, you know?
100%. So for this deep dive, we've been digging into a ton of material, news articles, expert analysis, the whole 9 yards.
Trying to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter.
Exactly. What we want to do today is give you a clear picture of these U.S. sanctions. What exactly are they targeting? How is China responding? And what does it all mean for the global landscape? It's complex stuff, but we're going to break it down.
Absolutely. Lay it all out on the table.
All right, so first, let's zoom out for a second and set the stage. As we said, the U.S. and China are in a full-blown tech race.
No doubt about it. And AI is the front line.
Right. And it's not just hype, this AI stuff. It's driving real advancements in every sector you can imagine, from like military defense systems to, even things like healthcare and finance.
And underpinning all of this is the hardware, the brains of the operation, so to speak, semiconductors.
These tiny AI chips, they're the building blocks of all this AI progress. And in a way, they're the real currency of power in this competition.
It's fascinating, really. You can trace so much of this tension back to these tiny little chips.
And it's why the U.S. has been so focused on limiting China's access to them.
Right. The U.S. has some serious concerns about how China might use these advanced technologies.
They've raised issues about intellectual property theft, unfair trade practices, and maybe even more importantly, the potential for China to use this AI tech for military purposes. And that's like a whole other can of worms.
Oh, for sure. That's where things get really interesting, geopolitically speaking.
So the big questions we need to answer are, how effective are these U.S. sanctions? Are they actually slowing China down? And how is China adapting and pushing back?
Big questions, and hopefully we can shed some light on them today.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of these sanctions. What exactly is the U.S. trying to restrict?
Well, at the highest level, it's about preventing China from getting its hands on the most advanced tools for developing artificial intelligence.
The stuff that's really pushing the boundary.
Exactly. And this boils down to three main areas. The first is the AI chips themselves, specifically the most sophisticated, high-performance chips.
The ones that can handle these massive, complex AI models everyone's talking about.
Right. The second area is the equipment needed to manufacture those chips.
Because it's not just about having the blueprints, right? You need the actual machinery to build them.
Exactly. And this equipment is incredibly specialized and expensive. And finally, the third area is the software, the critical software that powers the whole AI development process.
So the pretty comprehensive approach, targeting the chips, the tools to make them, and the software that runs them.
Exactly. And the Biden administration really upped the ante in 2022 with some pretty sweeping export controls.
They basically drew a line in the sand saying, this far and no further.
Yeah. They specifically named companies like NVIDIA and AMD.
Which are like the big dogs when it comes to these high-end AI chips.
All right. NVIDIA, for example, makes these chips called the A100 and the H100. And these things are the gold standard for training large-scale AI models. Think, like the models behind things like ChatGPT.
Powerful stuff. And the U.S. is basically saying China can't have these. The thinking is that without access to this level of processing power, China's AI development will hit a wall.
It's a bold move, for sure. And it's not just about the chips themselves. The U.S. has also been leaning on its allies, countries like the Netherlands and Japan.
Which are major players in the semiconductor industry, right?
Big time. You've got companies like ASML in the Netherlands. They make these incredibly precise machines that are essential for etching those tiny circuits onto silicon wafers. That's how you make advanced chips.
And without that equipment, you're kind of stuck.
Pretty much. And then there's Tokyo Electron in Japan, another giant in the semiconductor manufacturing world. The U.S. is really pushing these countries to restrict their sales to China as well.
So the U.S. is playing hardball here, trying to cut off China's access to the tech it needs from multiple angles.
It's a multi-pronged approach.
And the U.S. government's argument is that all of this is necessary to prevent China from using these advanced technologies for, well, nefarious purposes. They're worried about things like sophisticated surveillance systems.
The kind of stuff that could be used to monitor citizens on a massive scale.
Right. And then there's the potential for China to develop hypersonic weapons, missiles that travel at many times the speed of sound,
Incredibly difficult to defend against.
and autonomous drones. Basically killer robots that can operate independently.
Scary stuff, right? And all of this is powered by advanced AI, so you can see why the U.S. is concerned.
Definitely. But here's the thing. China isn't taking this lying down. They're fighting back, and they're getting pretty creative.
Oh, absolutely. They've got a whole playbook of countermeasures.
And one of their main strategies is to ramp up their own domestic chip production, basically saying, fine, if we can't buy the best chips, we'll just make them ourselves.
And they've got some heavy hitters in their corner. Companies like Huawei and SMIC are pouring resources into developing their own advanced chip-making capabilities.
And they're making some headway.
More than some people expected, for sure. Just recently, Huawei unveiled a smartphone powered by a domestically produced 7-nanometer chip.
That's a big deal, right?
Huge, especially considering that U.S. sanctions were specifically designed to cripple Huawei's access to that kind of cutting-edge technology.
So it's a sign that they're finding ways to work around the restrictions. And it's not just Huawei. The Chinese government is pumping massive amounts of money into domestic AI research and semiconductor fabrication. Billions and billions of dollars.
It's a clear signal of their priorities. They see technological independence as absolutely essential.
And they're not just throwing money at the problem. They've also got these major tech companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and they're all heavily invested in AI.
Trying to develop their own cutting-edge AI models to rival things like, ChatGPT.
So even if they can't get the absolute best hardware right now, they're pushing hard on the software side, and they're exploring other avenues as well.
Oh yeah, they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They're trying to diversify their supply chains, find ways to get the tech they need from countries that aren't on board with the U.S. sanctions.
So they're looking for loopholes, basically.
In a way, yeah. And they're also trying to make do with older generations of semiconductors that aren't subject to the same restrictions.
Making the most of what they've got.
Exactly. And then there are the rumors, the whispers of black market networks.
So some of the restricted tech might be slipping through the cracks.
It's hard to say for sure, but it wouldn't be surprising. The stakes are high, and there's always someone willing to take a risk for the right price.
It's a cat and mouse game, really.
That's a good way to put it. The U.S. tries to tighten the screws, and China finds a way to loosen them.
It's fascinating to watch play out. But it's not just a game, right? This has real consequences for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The ripples are being felt all over the world.
It's creating winners and losers, and it's forcing countries to pick sides, or at least try to find some kind of middle ground.
It's a delicate balancing act.
So let's talk about the global impact for a minute. What are some of the potential benefits for the U.S.?
Well, if these sanctions work as intended, the U.S. could slow down China's progress in AI, giving American companies a chance to maintain their lead, at least in the short term.
Buying them some time, basically.
Right. But there are also potential downsides for American companies, too. Think about companies like NVIDIA and Intel, the ones making those high-end AI chips.
They've been doing a lot of business in China.
A ton! China is a huge market for them, and these sanctions are essentially cutting them off from that market.
So they're losing out on a lot of potential revenue.
And that could hurt their ability to invest in future research and development. It's a tough trade-off.
And then there's Taiwan. They're kind of caught in the crosshairs here.
Right. Taiwan's home to TSMC, which is the world's leading manufacturer of advanced semiconductors, the absolute top of the line.
And they're a major supplier to both the U.S. and China.
Exactly. So they're in a really precarious position. If things escalate between the U.S. and China, Taiwan could get squeezed.
And if TSMC's production gets disrupted, the whole world would feel it.
Oh, yeah. The global tech industry relies heavily on TSMC. Any disruption to their operations would send shockwaves through the entire supply chain.
So there's a lot at stake. And other countries are having to navigate this carefully, too.
For sure, especially countries in Europe. They want to cooperate with the U.S. on security issues.
But they also don't want to fall behind in the AI race themselves.
Right. They need access to these technologies, too, so they're trying to find that sweet spot.
Walking a tightrope.
Absolutely. And it's not clear how long they can keep it up.
So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for this AI tech war?
Well, it seems pretty likely that the U.S. will keep tightening the screws. They're probably going to introduce even stricter export controls, maybe even stronger penalties for companies that try to evade the sanctions.
Trying to plug all the holes.
Exactly. And the U.S. is also trying to boost its own domestic semiconductor manufacturing through things like the Cheap PS Act. They're
Hmm.
pouring money into research and development, trying to reduce their reliance on foreign suppliers.
So they're playing offense and defense.
That's a good way to put it. But on the other side, China is showing no signs of backing down. They've got the resources, the determination, and the government backing to keep pushing forward.
They see AI dominance as a strategic imperative.
Absolutely. And that raises a really crucial question.
Million-dollar question.
Will these sanctions actually be enough to stop China from achieving its goals? Given their resources and their commitment, it seems unlikely that sanctions alone will be enough to completely derail their progress.
They're going to find a way, one way or another.
It seems that way. This is a long game, and China is playing for keeps.
So just to recap what we've covered today, we talked about the U.S. sanctions aimed at limiting China's access to those cutting-edge AI technologies. We discussed China's responses, their efforts to boost domestic production, find alternative supply chains, and just generally outmaneuver the restrictions. And we touched on the global implications, the impact on different countries and industries.
And all of this raises some really important questions for all of us to consider. What's going to happen to global innovation if this tech war keeps escalating? How do we balance national security concerns with the need for international collaboration in science and technology? And are we headed for a future where the world is divided into separate tech ecosystems?
A digital iron curtain, almost.
In a sense, yeah. These are big, complex issues with no easy answers, but the decisions being made today, the actions being taken right now, they're going to shape the technological landscape for decades to come. So it's something we all need to be paying attention to and thinking about, really. What role do you see AI playing in the future, and how do you think this competition between the U.S. and China is going to play out? These are questions that are going to be increasingly relevant in the years ahead.
Food for thought, for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today.
It's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And to everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Until then, stay curious.